She didn't want the truth, she wanted a confession. After accusing him of something he never did, his wife kicked him out of their bed and refused to let it go until he admitted to a lie just to give her what she wanted. But he didn't beg for his place back. He didn't confess to something false. He let her punishment expose exactly who she had become, and then made one quiet move that changed the balance of the marriage. This emotional relationship drama follows false accusations, emotional manipulation, disrespect, karma, and the cold comeback of a man who refused to be bullied into guilt. What would you do if your spouse punished you until you admitted to something you never did? Would you keep defending yourself, or step back and let their own behavior destroy the relationship? Share your thoughts below. My wife said, "You are sleeping on the couch until you apologize." I said, "All right, I did. Not apologize." 3 weeks later, I had converted the guest room into my bachelor pad. When she finally walked in, "My name is Brandon. I am 38 years old and I had been banished to the couch for 3 weeks over something so ridiculous that my head still hurts when I think about it." My wife Tanisha is 36 years old. She accused me of flirting with our new neighbor Ariana, who is 23 years old and just moved into the townhouse across from ours in a suburb outside Bedford with her boyfriend, Jared. Here is what actually happened. I was taking out the trash after dinner one evening. Ariana was in the parking lot struggling with a huge cardboard box that was clearly heavier than she expected. I walked over, asked if she needed help. She said yes, and I carried the box up the stairs to her door. We talked for maybe 2 minutes about the neighborhood, the noise, where the best grocery store was, and that was it. That was the entire interaction, the whole supposed crime. Apparently, Tanisha saw the whole thing from our bedroom window and went nuclear. When I came back in, she was already standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, jaw tight, breathing like she had just run a sprint. Tanisha said, "So, you just could not wait to throw yourself at the new girl, could you?" I genuinely thought she was joking. I laughed and said, "What are you talking about?" I helped her with a box. She stepped closer and said, "Do not gaslight me, Brandon. I saw how you were looking at her." I tried to explain. I said, "I carried a box and made small talk. She has a boyfriend. You literally saw him when they moved in last weekend." I was being neighborly. Tanisha raised her voice and said, "You were all over her. Practically drooling. You think I'm stupid?" Her eyes were bright and angry, and I could tell she had already decided what the truth was in her head. She finally said, "You were sleeping on the couch until you apologize and admit what you did." I stood there for a second, trying to process how we had gotten from trash duty to a full-blown accusation. Then I heard myself say very calmly, "All right." She blinked. Tanisha said, "All right, that is it." I said, "Yes. All right. I will sleep on the couch until you apologize." She scowled and said, "Sure." Then stormed off like she expected me to be begging for forgiveness within hours. Here's the thing. I did not do anything wrong. I'm not apologizing for helping a neighbor carry a box. That is not how trust and respect are supposed to work. Night 1 on the couch was awful. Our couch is perfect for sitting and watching a game, but it is terrible for sleeping. I'm a tall man and my feet hung off the armrest. By morning, my back felt like someone had replaced my spine with a bent crowbar. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee, stretching my shoulders, and wincing. Tanisha came downstairs, saw me, and said, "So, are you ready to apologize?" I said, "No." She sighed dramatically and grabbed her mug. She said, "You are being childish," and walked out the door on her way to work. I went to my job as a project manager downtown, replaying the argument in my head and trying to figure out where the logic had gone off a cliff. By night 3, I was done with that couch. We have a guest room in the back of the townhouse. It is not huge, but it is decent. Mostly storage in Tanisha's overflow closet space. I grabbed my pillow, a blanket, and moved to the old futon in there. It was still not great. But it was better than the couch. At least I could stretch out. Tanisha noticed immediately. She stood in the doorway of the guest room with her arms folded and said, "The couch too uncomfortable for you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then apologize." I said, "No." She actually smirked like this was some strategy game she was winning. Tanisha said, "Fine, enjoy the futon." Then she shut the door a little harder than necessary and walked away, heels clicking down the hall. That was the moment my brain shifted from temporary situation to adapt and upgrade. I make decent money as a project manager. Tanisha makes good money in marketing. We pay bills from our joint account, but after that, we each have our own separate accounts for personal spending. I had around $3,000 set aside that I had originally planned to use on a high-end tool set and a weekend fishing trip with my friend Brian. I decided to repurpose those funds. On day 4, during my lunch break, I ordered a memory foam mattress queen-sized online for $800 with same-week delivery to the house. That night, I stood in the guest room, looked at the sad futon, and imagined the room as something else, something better, something mine. It felt petty and satisfying at the same time. By day 7, I was browsing marketplace listings non-stop. I found a leather recliner for $200, a solid wood desk for $150, and a 55 inches flat screen television for $300 from someone who was moving out of state. I texted Brian and asked, "Can I borrow your truck this weekend?" He replied, "If you tell me why, this sounds like trouble." Saturday, while Tanisha was at her sister Monica's place across town, Brian and I drove around, picking everything up. Brian helped me carry the recliner and television inside. He looked at the bare guest room and whistled. Brian said, "You are really doing this, man." I said, "If I am banned from my own bedroom, I might as well make the most of the room I'm allowed to sleep in." He shook his head and said, "You're going to make this too comfortable to give up." Day 10, I discovered the real magic of online shopping. I ordered a compact microwave for $60 and a small mini refrigerator for $150. I installed some floating shelves for $50, a basic tool kit, and a nice rug for $120 that tied the room together in a way that made me oddly proud. The guest room was slowly becoming a fully functional studio. By day 14, I admit I was leaning into the pettiness. I bought a PlayStation 5 game console for $500 and a soundbar for $200. I added blackout curtains for $40 because I like to sleep in on weekends, and I chose a dark gray set that made the room feel cozy. I added a couple of frame posters from bands I've always liked but could never hang in the main bedroom because Tanisha said they did not match the decor. On day 18, I ordered strip lights for mood lighting, a couple more posters, and my favorite purchase of the whole project, a digital lock with a keypad for $150. By week 3, I had spent about $2,800 turning that guest room into my personal sanctuary. It became everything our master bedroom was not. My space, my rules, my taste, my quiet. Tanisha had not set foot in there once since I moved in. She would knock sometimes, stand in the doorway, and say things like, "You were being ridiculous." Or, "You can come back any time if you just admit you were wrong." She never actually came inside. I think she believed we were playing chicken, and she was waiting for me to break first. I had decided I was done breaking over things I did not do. One night, I was in my new room, sitting in the recliner, headphones on, playing Call of Duty Online with Brian, and sipping a cold beer from my mini refrigerator. I heard Tanisha try the door handle. The keypad lock did its job. The handle did not move. Tanisha said loudly, "Brandon, why is this door locked?" I paused the game and said, "Privacy." She said, "Open this door. Right now." I said, "No, thank you. I am good." There was a long moment of silence followed by 3 sharp knocks. Tanisha said, "Brandon, open this door immediately." I got up, walked to the door, and spoke through it without unlocking it. I said, "You banished me from our bedroom. This is my space now. You are welcome to apologize for falsely accusing me anytime." She said, "I'm not apologizing. I saw what I saw. Open this door." I said, "No." A few seconds later, I heard her walking away, then heard her voice again from the living room. She had called her mother Gloria and put the call on speaker so I could hear every word. It is a classic move of hers when she wants backup. Tanisha said, "Mom, he has lost his mind. He has locked himself in the guest room and will not come out." Gloria, whose voice always carries, said, "What do you mean locked in his own house?" Tanisha said, "He put a lock on the guest room. An actual lock with a code." Gloria said, "Why is he in the guest room, honey?" Tanisha hesitated. Then she said, "He is being punished." Gloria asked, "Punished for what?" Tanisha said, "He was flirting with a neighbor." Gloria's tone shifted. She said, "Was he really?" Tanisha said, "Mom, whose side are you on?" Gloria said, "I am just asking, what did he do exactly?" Tanisha went quiet, then finally muttered, "He helped her carry a box." There was silence on the line. Gloria said, "And that is it?" Tanisha said, "You did not see how he was looking at her." Gloria sighed and said, "Tanisha, maybe you should apologize." Tanisha said, "I cannot believe you were taking his side," and hung up the phone. She came back to the door and hit with her hand. Tanisha said, "I'm getting a locksmith." I said, "Go ahead. I own this house. I can put a lock on any interior door I want. Check the law." I had actually looked it up already. As long as the lock does not prevent someone from exiting in an emergency and the owners still have access to the house, interior locks are generally fine. A few minutes later, things went quiet. Apparently, she checked the law, too, because she stopped mentioning the locksmith. Then came the text messages. They poured in, one after another. "This is insane. You are acting like a child. That room is for guests. All your clothes are still in our room." I responded, "I bought new clothes. They are in my closet now." She replied, "Your closet? It is a guest room." I said, "Not anymore." She said, "You cannot just claim a room." I said, "You claim the whole bedroom. I'm just working with what I have." She wrote back, "That is different." I responded, "You punish me for something I did not do. So, I made alternative arrangements." She finally texted, "This is stupid. Come back to our room." I asked, "Did you just invite me back?" She sent, "Only if you apologize." I answered, "No, thank you. I'm good here." That night, I slept 8 straight hours on my memory foam mattress in my room, door locked. The next morning, while I was at work, she finally went in there for the first time. I had installed a camera in the corner of the room, facing the door in the main space. It is legal where we live to have cameras in your own rooms for security. When I checked the footage from my phone on my lunch break, I watched Tanisha open the door and step inside. Her jaw literally dropped when she saw the transformation. She stood in the doorway for a long time just staring. She walked over and touched the television, ran her hand along the new mattress, opened the mini refrigerator, sat in the recliner, and looked at the posters on the wall. Then she noticed the PlayStation and the sound bar, and I swear she looked like she might cry. When I got home that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table, not angry, just tired and tight-lipped. I grabbed a bottle of water and sat across from her. She stared at the table and finally said, "You really set up a whole apartment in there?" I said, "It is just a room with a refrigerator, microwave, and a PlayStation." Tanisha asked, "How much did all of that cost?" I said, "My personal savings, not our joint funds." She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked, "So, you are really not going to apologize?" I said, "I am really not going to apologize for something I did not do." She said, "So, what? You're just going to live in there forever?" I said, "Until you apologize for falsely accusing me and banishing me from my own bedroom?" "Yes, pretty much." She stood up so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Tanisha said, "This is ridiculous." I said, "It was ridiculous 3 weeks ago when you started it. Now it is just my new normal." She left the table, went upstairs, and shut the bedroom door. I did not see her for the rest of the night. She stayed in her old bedroom. I stayed in my room, ate takeout in my recliner, and played games with Brian. I had a cold beer from my refrigerator and my game loaded up. And honestly, I felt peaceful. The whole thing was petty, of course, but I also felt like for once I was not folding myself into knots just to keep the peace. After that, the situation did not calm down. It escalated in strange directions. Tanisha decided she would try to weaponize household chores. First, she announced that she would no longer do my laundry. She stood in the hallway, hands on her hips, and said, "Just so you know, I'm not washing your clothes anymore." I said, "All right." She frowned in my calm tone and walked away. A few days later, she came home to find a compact washer and dryer combination unit humming quietly in the corner of my room. I had found it on a second-hand site for $400, lifted it into the room with Brian's help and connected it to the appropriate hookups. She stared at it, then at me. Tanisha said, "You bought your own washing machine?" I said, "I did." Next, she decided to stop cooking my portions of dinner. She made herself elaborate meals and plated at exactly one serving. Some nights she would sit on the couch eating while watching a show and glance at my closed door like she was expecting me to come out and complain. Instead, I cooked in my microwave, used my mini refrigerator, and started meal prepping every Sunday afternoon for the week. I bought an air fryer for $80 and sat on my desk next to a small cutting board and a set of knives. I actually started eating healthier because I was portioning my own meals. One evening while I was seasoning chicken, Tanisha stood in the doorway watching. She said, "You really do not need me at all, do you?" I said, "I would rather want you than need you. Lately, I do not feel like you want me either." She had no answer for that and walked away. Then Tanisha tried a new tactic. She called a house meeting and invited her best friend Candy to attend as some kind of mediator. They sat me down in the living room like it was an intervention. Candy said gently, "Brandon, do you not think this has gone too far?" I said, "I am respecting Tanisha's decision. She told me to sleep outside the bedroom. I'm doing that." Candy said, but you have turned the guest room into a full man cave. That room is supposed to be for guests. I asked what guests. Gloria, who prefers to stay at a hotel because she does not like our guest bathroom, or Tanisha's brother, David, who has not visited in 2 years. Candy said, that is not the point. I said, it is exactly the point. The room was storage. Now it is used. Tanisha said, you are being spiteful. I said, I am being comfortable. You made a decision. I adapted. Tanisha's eyes flashed. She said, fine, then I'm taking the master bathroom completely. You can use the hall bathroom. Candy looked at her with wide eyes, but stayed quiet. I shrugged and said, all right. Tanisha blinked as if she had been expecting a fight. She said, that is it. I said, yes, the hall bathroom is fine. What she did not realize was that I had already considered that scenario. The hall bathroom is right next to my room, and the master bathroom is attached to the master bedroom. You have to walk through the bedroom to get to it. So, I rarely used it anymore. That night, I moved my toiletries into the hall bathroom. While I was at it, I decided if I was going to use it, I would upgrade it. I installed a rainfall shower head for $60. Then, I ordered one of those advanced toilet seats with a built-in bidet function for $200. It arrived 2 days later and changed my life. I added premium towels, a small shelf of plants, a humidifier, and a mat that felt like stepping onto a cloud. In 48 hours, that bathroom went from basic to spa-like. Meanwhile, Tanisha suddenly found out that having full control of the master bathroom also meant she was the only one cleaning it. I heard her on the phone with Monica through the thin walls one night. She said, he does not even use this bathroom anymore. He just went and made the other one nice. He bought a whole birthday Monica. A bidet? She sounded half outraged, half jealous. The real turning point came when Tanisha's company announced a new hybrid policy. She would be working in the office 3 days and from home 2 days each week. She needed a home office. And in her mind, there was only one obvious place. One morning at 7 o'clock, she knocked on my door. I opened it and leaned against the frame. Tanisha said, we need to talk about the guest room. I said, my room. She ignored that and said, it needs to be an office. I am working from home twice a week starting next month. I said, congratulations. That sounds convenient. She said, so, you need to move your things out. I actually laughed. I said, no. Tanisha said, Brandon, be reasonable. I need an office. I said, then set one up in the master bedroom. It is large. She said. There is no space with the bed and the dressers. I said, then rearrange them. Tanisha clenched her jaw and said, where you could stop being petty and give me the room. I said, the room I have paid to furnish the room I am living in because you kicked me out of the bedroom. That room. She changed tactics. She said, I will let you back in the bedroom if you give me the office. I asked, but I would still have to apologize. She said, of course. I said, then no. She slammed the door and walked away. 20 minutes later, I heard drilling in the living room. When I walked out, I saw Tanisha installing a small desk in the corner directly across from the television. Her new office was now in the communal space where I usually watch games and movies. I went online and bought noise-cancelling headphones for $300. Problem solved. A few days after that, I came home and Noticed scratch marks around the keypad of my door. The lock had clearly been tampered with. I stepped into my room and checked my things. Nothing obvious was missing, but the marks bothered me. I walked back to the kitchen where Tanisha was chopping vegetables. I asked, "Did you try to break into my room?" She said, "It is not your room." I repeated, "Did you or did you not try to break the lock?" She said, "I needed to check if you were damaging the house." I said, "By breaking and entering. It is my house too." She raised her chin and said, "Which is why I can go in any room I want." I said, "And why am I putting? A lock on my door is allowed and you're trying to break it is destruction of property." Her face went pale for a moment. She said, "You would not dare report me." I did not answer. That night I installed a camera in the hallway face of my door. Full disclosure signs are required in some places, but in common areas in our home, it is allowed as long as both parties know. She noticed the camera the next morning. The little red light blinked at her every time she walked past. Brian came over that weekend to watch a game. We carried wings and drinks into my room and closed the door. Tanisha's song "Go In." A few minutes later, she knocked. She said, "You cannot have people in there." I said, "Why not? It is my room." She said, "I do not want strangers in my house." I said, "Brian has been here 50 times. You went to his wedding." She said, "Not in that room. That room is for guests." I said, "Exactly. He is a guest." 10 minutes later, she called the police. I heard her in the living room saying, "My husband refuses to leave a room in my house." When the police officer arrived, he looked exhausted, like he had already dealt with too many domestic disputes that day. Tanisha started explaining loudly while pointing toward my door. The police officer asked, "Ma'am, does he live here?" Tanisha said, "Yes," but he interrupted. "Is he threatening you?" She said, "No," but he asked, "Is he breaking any laws?" She said, "He put a lock on an interior door." The police officer turned to me. I calmly explained that I lived there, paid the mortgage, had a lock on the bedroom I was using, and that my wife had kicked me out of the master bedroom weeks ago. The police officer sighed and said, "You two should probably get counseling," then left. After he walked out, my phone buzzed. Tanisha had sent me a request through a money transfer app for $1,400. The message said, "Half of your room furnishings since they are marital property." I declined it and sent her a request for $1,900 for half of the master bedroom furnishings I was no longer allowed to use. She declined that and sent another request for $500 for emotional distress. I sent her one for $1 labeled service fee for carrying Ariana's box. She did not respond. For a while, the house was full of cold silence. After the visit from the police officer, Tanisha went scorched earth. She changed the wireless internet password and refused to give it to me. Joke's on her. I called a provider and had my own internet line installed directly into my room. The technician looked puzzled when I led him straight to the guest room, but I just smiled and said, "I work from home sometimes and need a stable connection. $90 a month. For a peace of mind felt worth it." Tanisha started inviting her friends over constantly. Wine nights, book clubs, jewelry parties, all deliberately loud and all held right outside my door in the living room. Their laughter, clinking glasses, and chatter would spill down the hall. I turned on my sound bar, put on my noise-canceling headphones, and kept studying coding courses on my laptop, occasionally pausing to cook something in the air fryer. The line finally got crossed on a Tuesday. I came home from work and walked down the hall toward my room. My door was wide open. The keypad lock had been removed entirely. My stomach dropped. Inside, everything looked wrong. My PlayStation was unplugged and pushed to the side. My mini refrigerator was turned off, and the food inside was starting to spoil. My bed was stripped, the sheets dumped in a pile on the floor. On my desk, there was a piece of paper with a single sentence. Maintenance inspection required. Management. We do not have management. We own the house. I stood there breathing slowly and then called Tanisha. She answered on the third ring. I said, "What did you do to my room?" She said, "The room needed inspection for damages." I said, "You broke into my room and touched my belongings." Tanisha said, "It is not breaking in if I own the house too." I said, "You removed my lock. That is destruction of property." She said, "Prove it." That was the moment something in me changed. I felt a sharp cold clarity. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just said, "All right," and hung up. Then I gathered everything I had already been collecting. Receipts for every purchase I had made. Screenshots of every text where she admitted to kicking me out of the bedroom. Photographs of a damaged lock and the scratch marks. A copy of the police report from when she falsely implied I was doing something illegal, and clips from the hallway camera showing her removing the lock. I called a lawyer. Not yet for a complete divorce, but for legal separation and a formal agreement about household boundaries. 3 days later, Tanisha was served paperwork at the house. The documents requested exclusive use of the guest room for me, compensation for the destroyed lock, and a clear division of household spaces and responsibilities. That evening, she came into the kitchen with puffy eyes, holding the papers in a shaking hand. She said, "You got a lawyer?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You're doing all of this over a lock." I said, "I'm doing this because you broke into my room and destroyed my property after weeks of escalating this over something I did not do." She said, "You are going to destroy our marriage over this." I said, "I am sleeping in a room you sent me to. You are the one who keeps raising the stakes." She started crying. Tanisha said, "I am stressed. Work is awful. My mother is on my back. You just abandoned me." I said, "You kicked me out. You told me to sleep somewhere else." She said, "I wanted you to fight for us." I said, "By apologizing for something I did not do." She said, "By showing you care enough to come back." I said, "I showed I care for myself by refusing to be gaslit. That is also part of a marriage." Later, my lawyer told me that Tanisha's lawyer had basically laughed at her version of the story. Kicking your spouse out of the bedroom and then claiming abandonment when they sleep elsewhere does not look good in court. Tanisha responded by trying to win me back in increasingly strange ways. She started walking around the house in lingerie, cooking elaborate dinners and eating them in front of me at the dining table, moaning about how good everything tasted, clearly hoping I would give in just to share the meal. She brought home desserts from my favorite bakery and left them on the counter without making me a plate. I kept living my life. I ate my prep meals, did my work, played games, and studied. Then she brought out what she later called her nuclear option. She invited Ariana and her boyfriend Jared over for dinner. She did not tell me. I came home from work one Friday to see Ariana and Jared sitting at our dining room table looking deeply uncomfortable. Tanisha was moving around the kitchen with a bright forced smile. Tanisha said, "Brandon, join us. I was just getting to know our new neighbors better." Ariana looked at me with wide apologetic eyes. Jared looked confused, glancing between the two of us like he had walked into the middle of a play with no script. I opened the refrigerator, grabbed a protein shake, and said, "Thank you, but I have plans in my room." Tanisha's voice tightened. She said, "Do not be rude, honey. Sit with us." The word honey was so fake it almost echoed. I said, "I am fine. Enjoy your dinner." Ariana suddenly stood up. She said, "Actually, we should go. We have an early morning." Tanisha said, "But you just got here." Jared stood with her and said, "Yes, we are so sorry. The food smells great." They practically hurried out. I heard Jared whisper, "What was that?" As they left, Tanisha turned on me the second the door closed. She said, "You embarrassed me." I said, "You embarrassed yourself. You invited the woman you accused me of flirting with to our house to prove some kind of point." She said, "I was being nice. I am trying to save our marriage." I said, "By making everyone uncomfortable and still refusing to admit you were wrong." She said, "I was not wrong." I said, "Then we have nothing to save." That was last week. The next day, Tanisha packed several bags and moved to Monica's place. She left a note on the counter that read, "Since you want to live alone so badly." The truth was, I did not want to live alone. I wanted my wife to admit she was wrong about one very specific thing. For 2 weeks, she stayed with Monica, posting dramatic quotes on social media about knowing your worth and believing people when they show you who they are. During that time, I got the house appraised, talked to my lawyer about buyout options, and started therapy. The therapist listened quietly as I described the last 6 weeks. He asked me how many times in the past I had apologized for things just to keep Tanisha from exploding. The answer was too many. While she was gone, I kept improving my room. I added a small beer refrigerator under the desk, installed a wall mount for the television so the room looked more open, reorganized the shelving, added a few plants, and bought a better office chair. If I was going to be rebuilding my life, I might as well be comfortable doing it. Then Tanisha came back with David and a rented moving truck. No warning, no heads up. I was working from home on my desk when I heard the truck door slam outside. David walked in behind her with a box on his shoulder. Tanisha looked around like she was evaluating the house for the first time. She said, "I am taking my things." I said, "All right." She said, "And the bedroom furniture is half mine." I said, "Then I am taking the bed and the dresser. You can have a nightstand." I shrugged. She waited for an argument that did not come. She said, "I want the television from the living room too." I said, "That is mine. I bought it before we got married." She said, "I do not care." I pulled up the receipt on my phone. The receipt I have says otherwise. She turned red and said, "Fine. The kitchen appliances, then we bought those together. You can have half." I said, "You can have half. Let me know how you plan to take half a microwave." She glared, snatched the single-serve coffee maker from the counter and tried to take my new coffee machine from my room. I said, "That one is 6 weeks old and bought with my account. I can show you the order confirmation." She left it and took the old one instead. They spent 3 hours going through the house, arguing over what she would take and what would stay. At one point, Tanisha tried to roll my gaming chair out of my room. I stood in front of her and said, "That was in this room when you kicked me in. Here. It is mine now." She said, "A judge will not see it that way." I said, "Then let a judge decide." She backed down. The real explosion came when she discovered I had put a padlock on one side of the attic storage. She came down from the attic breathing hard and said, "You changed the locks on the attic." I said, "No, I put a padlock on my section. Yours is still open." She said, "How did you even divide it?" I said, "Tape line down the middle. Your holiday decorations and old clothes are on the left. Mine are on the right." She went back up, checked, and came down furious. Tanisha said, "You took more space." I said, "I took exactly half. I measured it." She said, "This is pathetic. We are adults." I said, "Adults usually do not get kicked out of their bedrooms for helping a neighbor with a box either, but here we are." David stepped forward and said, "You are being a petty little man." I looked him in the eye and said, "Choose your next words carefully. You are in my house." He said, "It is Tanisha's house, too." I said, "For now." That stopped both of them. Tanisha said, "What do you mean for now?" I said, "I mean, we are getting divorced. The house will either be sold, I will buy you out. Whatever the judge decides. I am the only one on the mortgage. This ends." Tanisha said, "You are divorcing me over this." I said, "I am divorcing you over you kicking me out of our bedroom, falsely accusing me of cheating, refusing to apologize, breaking into my room, destroying my property, calling the police on me, and now stripping the house." The box was just the beginning. She sat down on the hallway floor, eyes glossy. She whispered, "This is not how it was supposed to go." I asked, "How is it supposed to go, Tanisha?" She said, "You were supposed to apologize, sleep on the couch a few nights, feel bad, then come back and appreciate me more." I said, "Appreciate you for falsely accusing me." She said, "For fighting for our marriage." I said, "Games are not fighting. They are control." David helped her up and said quietly, "Come on, Tanisha. Let us go." She tried one last time. She said, "If you loved me, you would apologize just to end this." I said, "If you loved me, you would not need me to apologize for something I did not do." They left with the truck half full, Tanisha crying silently in the passenger seat. 2 weeks earlier, I had filed the divorce papers. She responded by demanding counseling instead. So, we went to court-mandated mediation. The counselor listened to both of us describe the situation. After Tanisha finished, the counselor raised an eyebrow and said very gently, "It sounds like trust has been severely damaged, and neither of you is willing to see the other's perspective. This may already be over." Tanisha's lawyer advised her to accept my buyout offer for the house. I am keeping the townhouse, paying her part of the equity. It is expensive, but worth it. My room is already perfect. The master bedroom is now mine again as well. Brian helped me move the large bed back in. We joked about knocking down the wall between the 2 rooms one day to make a huge suite. The last text exchange I had with Tanisha went like this. She wrote, "This is really it over a box." I replied, "It was never about the box." She said, "Then what?" I wrote it was about respect, trust, and partnership. You showed her you do not believe in any of that. She said, "I was jealous." That is normal. I wrote jealousy is normal. What you did after was not. She said, "So, you're just giving up on almost 10 years together." I wrote, "I am moving on from 6 weeks of you showing me who you really are." She never responded. Last I heard from mutual friends. She is still at Monica's, still posting about toxic relationships and red flags, still telling anyone who will listen that I ruined our marriage over nothing. But it was not nothing. It was every time she dismissed my feelings. Every time she demanded an apology for something that only happened in her imagination. Every time she chose control over communication. That box was just the last straw that snapped the support I've been carrying for years. These days, the house is quiet but peaceful. I kept the gaming setup in my room and turned the master bedroom into a calm place just for sleeping. I started going on coffee dates. Nothing serious yet, just meeting people and being honest about my situation. When I tell the story, most people stare at me in disbelief. One woman said, "You turned a guest room into a full apartment rather than apologize." She grinned and said, "Legend." Another woman said, I do not know. I might have just apologized. I said, that is fair. Everyone has different limits. We part ways on good terms. If nothing else, I am walking into new connections clear about who I am and what I will not tolerate. Last weekend, Brian helped me move the last of Tanisha's leftover items to the garage for pickup. When we finished, we stood in the doorway of the master bedroom. He said, feels different in here now. I said, feels like a crime scene that has finally been cleaned up. We both laughed, then went back to my room to watch a game. A few days ago, Ariana and Jared invited me over for beers on their small patio. They said they had been meaning to talk ever since that strange dinner. Ariana said, that night was the most awkward dinner of our lives. Your wife, well, ex-wife, kept talking about how perfect your marriage was. While looking like she wanted to cry, Jared said, we almost moved because we felt like we had caused a problem just by existing. I told him the whole story from beginning to end. When I finished, Jared shook his head, walked inside, came back with another round of beers, and handed me one. He said, man, that is crazy. We all laughed. It felt good to have neighbors who understood that the crime that ended my marriage was nothing more than one man helping another human being carry a box up the stairs. If you enjoyed the story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.